Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Calev Ben David. Each week we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and in the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Tzedek. Nicole?
Thanks, Calev. Here are top 5 items from the Jewish world this week. The IDF says American-Israeli hostage Omer Nutra was killed during a battle on October 7th. His body held in Gaza ever since. Up until now, the lone soldier from New York was believed to be alive. Hamas released a video of another Israeli-American hostage this week, Aiden Alexander, who pleads for U.S. President-elect Donald Trump to, quote, use your influence and the full power of the United States to negotiate for our freedom. A new report by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry finds the number of anti-Semitic incidents directed at the Jewish community down under have risen to more than 2,000 over the past year. That's more than quadruple the number over the previous year, reflecting the global surge in Jew hatred since the October 7th terror attack on Israel. New York Governor Kathy Hochul signs into law a bill that makes it a criminal offense of aggravated harassment to forcibly remove a person's religious garb, including yarmulkes, Hasidic hats, and hijabs. The move comes amid a surge of anti-Semitic attacks across the state, including many incidents in which religious Jews have had their head coverings swatted away by assailants on the streets. The Israeli government has, for the first time, established a special committee that will memorialize the lives of diaspora Jews killed in anti-Semitic attacks abroad. The panel, with members drawn from officials of government ministries and national institutions, was created in recognition of the need and moral obligation to commemorate the diaspora Jews who are not citizens of Israel. And New York's iconic Katz's Deli commissions the first commercial in its 136-year history. The digital ad was produced by filmmaker Nico Heller in return for having his wedding at the Lower East Side Eatery. The ad features a Jewish retiree on Miami Beach ordering one of Katz's trademark pastrami on rye sandwiches via the deli's nationwide shipping service. Now, those are all of your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Calev.
The name Kushner was a prominent one during Donald Trump's first term as president, with Jared Kushner, his Orthodox Jewish son-in-law, serving as a special advisor overseeing policies on Israel and the Middle East. He was a driving force behind the moving of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the Abraham Accords, and the Trump proposal for Israeli-Palestinian peace. Now, there's been much speculation whether Jared will return to the incoming administration in some capacity or influence it from outside the White House. But at any rate, there will be a Kushner serving in Trump's second term, with Jared's father, Charles, appointed as the next U.S. ambassador to France. For more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, in Washington, D.C. And Mark, Charles Kushner himself has an interesting history.
Interesting, to say the least. A real estate developer, like Donald Trump himself, inherited some of that from his father, like Trump himself, so kind of peas in a pod in that regard. And like Trump himself, he's been convicted of a felony, several of them actually. Charles Kushner, convicted in 2005 on 16 federal counts, including tax evasion, tampering with a federal witness, and lying to the Federal Election Commission. He was a former Democratic donor, now heavily into Republican politics. At the time, the prosecutor was one Chris Christie, now more commonly known as a former governor of New Jersey, but made his bones as a prosecutor. And he went after Kushner on these counts. Kushner, during this investigation, set up a camera, hidden camera, to ensnare his brother-in-law in a sex scandal, having sex with a prostitute, then send it off to his own sister in order to try to intimidate her, which is one of the counts he was brought up on. So a wild, wild background for Charles Kushner, now more commonly known as the father of Jared Kushner. And Charles Kushner, after all this and some rehabilitation to his image, some philanthropy along the way, He received a pardon from Donald Trump back in 2020 and now is heading to France to be the U.S. ambassador in this very interesting expanded family, Calev.
Very interesting. And Charles Kushner, a strong backer of Jewish causes, presumably might have something to say to France about the situation with anti-Semitism there. Now, Jared Kushner, we still don't know if he'll have any real formal role in the administration. There's also another Kushner, Joshua Kushner, his brother, who's been somewhat lower profile by now, especially on Jewish issues. But recently, his name did pop up in the news.
Lower profile is relative when you're talking about this particular family, but yes, indeed, Joshua Kushner in the news lately for a couple different reasons. Number one, he teamed up with his brother on a philanthropic effort, each donating $1 million in the name of their respective families to the Chabad house in the United Arab Emirates in memory of the murdered Rabbi Tzvi Kogan, who was murdered by Iranian-backed terrorists a few weeks ago. Joshua Kushner also sticking up more, at least publicly, for Israel. He came to the backing of Patrick Collison, the co-founder and CEO of the Stripe payment system. Collison came under heavy backlash within the last week for simply posting an image of the Tel Aviv beach and saying it was good to be back in Tel Aviv. Collison took immense backlash online from Palestinian supporters and anti-Israel backers, but Kushner coming out in support of him online and has been more present, I would say, on the Israel issue over the last year, though very subtly, not too deep into it, but subtly making some comments on social media along the way.
All right. It sounds like we will be hearing the Kushner name one way or the other during the second Trump administration. Mike Wagenheim there in Washington, D.C. Thank you for that, Mike. These are complicated times for the American Jewish community, shaken by the surge of anti-Semitism in recent years and challenged on several fronts over its traditional support for Israel. So how does a congregational rabbi navigate these tricky waters and provide comfort and guidance for Jews during this period? Well, that's the subject of a new book titled For Such a Time as This on Being Jewish Today, written by conservative Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, the spiritual leader of the Park Avenue Synagogue, which is one of America's oldest and largest congregations. And Rabbi Cosgrove joins us now from New York City. Rabbi Cosgrove, thank you for joining us. First of all, if you could explain the title of your book, where the quote comes from, because I think that has a lot to do with the theme of this book.
Thank you so much for having me. The book's title comes from the biblical book of Esther, which we read on the festival of Purim. And Esther thought that she had it good. She thought that she was able to integrate, assimilate. Her Hebrew name means to hide her Jewish identity. She rises up to the highest reaches of power in the palace. And we know what happens in the story. Haman's wicked decree comes down, and by way of an emissary, Mordecai, her uncle, reaches out to her in the palace confines and says, "You won't escape at this time, and who knows if it was not for such a time as this that you've arrived at your royal station." And we know what happens. She rises up as a woman, as a queen, as a Jew, and the Jews of ancient Shushan are saved. And I really think that's the message of this moment of post-October 7th American Jewry, that we were traumatized, but we were not paralyzed. This was a moment in time that we all needed to find our Esther moment. None of us would have chosen this circumstance, but when the chips have been down, American Jewry has risen up, as did Queen Esther.
Has risen up, but it is facing challenges domestically, as I said, with anti-Semitism. Of course, I mentioned Israel. Well, let's just talk about how they deal with those feelings of grief, for example, following the October 7th massacre. Here in Israel, of course, it's a very personal thing. How should American Jews be responding to it?
Look, I think this moment of time, American Jews may or may not have been engaged in their Jewish identities. I make a distinction in the book between what I call Genesis Jews and Exodus Jews. I got it from a teacher of mine, Rabbi Daniel Hartman, but I use it in a different direction, that Genesis Jews are those asserting a positive affirmative, Lech Lecha, go forth, Jewish identity. Exodus Jews are Jews who, like in the first verses of the book of Exodus, are made other by Pharaoh, oppressed, dangerous perhaps in perception, and we all became on October 7th othered like Exodus Jews. And the challenge right now is how we can keep our Genesis positive Jewish identity, knowing that this is a moment not just about Israel. The crimes of October 7th were not just against Israelis, they were crimes against Jews. Frankly, they were crimes against all of humanity. And we have seen a porous and pernicious blurring of the line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism here in America. And so we need to be eyes wide open to the threats that Israel faces by the ring of fire of Iran and its proxies. And we also have to remember that we need to assert a positive Jewish identity. We can't give those who hate us the victory of defining what our Judaism means.
Right. Now, part of that identity is support and identification for Israel. That is a challenge for Jews. It's in some way, many American Jews, both externally, given the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, but also maybe internally with some Jews who feel ambivalent reactions to this or that government policy here. So how should they be able to navigate that?
Look, the big story of 2023 prior to October 7th was the judicial reforms. And you had American Jews at the behest of many Israelis saying, if you care about Israel, then you need to stand up and separate our support for Israel and Israelis and our support for this or that Israeli government. So that happened prior to October 7th. And so when American Jews, especially young American Jews, and I have a whole chapter in my book on this subject of those who don't see their liberal values expressed in this Israeli government. And when you see sometimes hundreds of thousands, sometimes hundreds of Israelis marching in protest of the Israeli government out of love of Israel, the argument that one cannot make that distinction here in the diaspora just doesn't hold water. So I think we need to have a far more expansive view of what it means to be pro-Israel in this time and, frankly, in all times.
Lastly, briefly, Park Avenue Synagogue, as I mentioned, one of the oldest congregations, is flourishing. Some people have said the golden age of American Jewry may be over. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think we're just getting started. I think we are in a moment of time where the challenge is going to be how to extend the tail. Some people talk about October 8th Jews. Some people talk about the surge, a tribal moment, a reawakening. But no question right now in my community and many communities, we're seeing a surge of Jewish identity and engagement. Of course, we don't want it from trauma. And of course, we want it to extend well past the time of these dark days. And really, that's a message of right now. We're entering into Calev, the Jewish month, which contains Hanukkah. This is a time to find the light in the darkness. This is a time to find that little cruse of oil that extends well beyond what anyone thought it could. I'm doubling down on American Jewry. I'm a big believer that our best days are ahead.
All right, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, the book is For Such a Time as This on Being Jewish Today. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News. This year marks 100 years since the death of Franz Kafka, the Czech Jewish writer whose nightmarish vision of modern existence has become so iconic it's coined a new word, Kafkaesque. The National Library of Israel, which holds many of Kafka's personal papers in a priceless archive, is marking this centennial with a special exhibit at its new building in Jerusalem. Let's take a look. The great Czech Jewish writer Franz Kafka had dreams of emigrating to the land of Israel before his untimely death at age 41 from tuberculosis. But if Kafka never made it here, many of his personal papers did, brought by his best friend, Dr. Max Brod, when he arrived in Tel Aviv from Prague in 1939. Now those papers, which Brod willed to the Israel National Library, but were only fully acquired by the institution after a long legal struggle with the heirs of Brod's former secretary, are forming the basis of a new exhibit, Kafka, Metamorphosis of an Author.
It's a kind of historical obligation, I would say, and also an institutional obligation, since we are among the three leading world institutions holding most of Kafka's papers, which is the Oxford Bodleian Library, the German Literature Archive in Marbach, and us. And I think in particular due to the fact that in 2024 we commemorated the 100th anniversary, the death anniversary of Franz Kafka. That was maybe not a beautiful match, but a match that we, of course, had to use in this beautiful new venue of our library, where we are able to present all those materials in a very proper way.
The first part of the exhibit, which includes Kafka's letters, notebooks, and manuscripts, tracks his life from his struggles with his parents, his beginnings as a writer, and his inspiring but difficult relationships with such women as Felice Bauer, Dora Diamant, and Milena Jasenska. It also examines his complicated relationship with his Jewish identity, a subject of much study and debate.
I would say that Kafka clearly had a Jewish connotation. He was absolutely aware where he was coming from. I wouldn't say that this played a central and very integral role in his personal everyday life, but he paid attention to that. You can see that he was visiting Jewish circles in university. You can see that he was studying Hebrew, and actually he was a very, very ardent student of Hebrew. And you can also see that he was even visiting the Zionist Congress in 1913 in Vienna. He was a bit disappointed about it, but still he was there. He showed interest in that. And we also know for sure that by the end of his life, he was planning maybe even to immigrate to Palestine in order to live here. We know that he was too sick to come here, but all these facts, I think, illustrate that he was clearly aware about his roots and about his background.
In such famous works as The Trial, The Castle, and Metamorphosis, Kafka created a surreal view of modern existence as an unfeeling, incomprehensible, bureaucratic nightmare, a vision we today call Kafkaesque. The second part of the exhibit focuses on Kafka's influence on society and culture, including here in Israel.
I think Kafka has something to say to Israelis over generations. In the meanwhile, you see that his first works were published in Hebrew since 1945, and until today they are again and again translated into Hebrew. There are more than one editions of most of his works, so there's a readership, and of course it also influenced the Israeli artists. May it be in art, or may it be in theater, in ballet, or in cinema, and so on. So people are still trying to understand this Kafka world and to make a match between that and their everyday experience that they find here. And last but not least, we invited 8 modern Israeli illustrators to respond, and invited them to respond to Kafka's graphic work. And I think they made it in a very beautiful way and very convincingly in my eyes.
The Kafka exhibit is the first temporary exhibit presented in the New Jerusalem building of the Israel National Library, which sits right opposite the Knesset. Running until June, the library hopes it serves as both a gateway for new readers of Kafka and an affirmation of an author whose work has proven timeless a century after his death.
Still, he is one of the most important authors of modern literature and definitely of the 20th century. So people know the name Kafka, people know the word Kafkaesque, meaning something that's going on that you cannot really figure out, which has no solution, and something important is happening to you and you don't have control on that. In order to let people know a bit more about the background of this brilliant author, who he was, where he came from, who his friends were, and so on, we are hoping that our visitors would come with an idea, a better idea of all this.
The golden age of Spanish Jewry came to a tragic finish with the mass expulsion of 1492. But that was not the end of the story. In recent years, the Jewish community has been reborn in Madrid, centered around the city's Beit Yaakov synagogue. I-24 News correspondent Emily Francis went to the capital of Spain to hear its story.
Nestled in the middle of the sprawling city of Madrid sits a treasure that opens the door between the past and the present. The Bet Yaakov Synagogue opened its doors in 1978, the first new synagogue in Madrid since the 1492 Inquisition. However, the Jewish community was formally established in 1917. Today's synagogue houses a community of approximately 300 people from many origins, led by Rabbi Moshe Ben Dahan.
La Comunidad Judía de Madrid, la mayoría de sus miembros.
The majority of the members of the Jewish community of Madrid are of Sephardic origin, but we also have Ashkenazi members. After World War II, European Jews came from the Holocaust. And in 1956, when Morocco gained independence from Spain, many Jewish families flooded into Spain and Israel.
And you can see the history in the Torahs themselves.
This is an antique Torah from Romania. This one is the oldest.
How old is this?
It's from Morocco and more than 100 years old.
The decor is also meaningful, from beautiful stained glass to a quote from one of King David's Psalms that pays homage to the famous 14th century Toledo synagogue, El Tránsito.
Since this is the first new synagogue constructed since the time of the Jewish expulsion in 1492, we wanted to emulate the most famous synagogue in Jewish Spanish history, the Tránsito Synagogue of Toledo.
Rabbi Moshe Ben Dahan says in general, anti-Semitism in Spain abated after the death of longtime dictator Francisco Franco.
Francisco Franco was the dictator from 1939 to 1973, and he instilled Catholicism as the national religion and ideology. But in 1977, the Spanish amnesty law allowed for freedom of religion. And for this reason, we felt safe building and opening the synagogue in 1978.
However, in the wake of the October 7th massacre and rising anti-Semitism throughout Europe and the world, Jews of Madrid are keeping a low profile, but are not living in fear.
Listen, October the 7th was a huge pain for the entire Jewish community. But fortunately, we don't feel the anti-Semitism when we walk the streets. In general, the anti-Semitism is reflective of the politics, the press, and social media.
In fact, Rabbi Ben Dahan says the community continues to grow with more people moving from Latin American countries. Also coming full circle is the scores of Spaniards who are showing an interest in exploring their own Jewish ancestry in this new age.
Many people in Spain are showing an interest in Judaism, including Jewish texts and literature. Not all the Jews left in 1492. Many converted but continued certain rituals in private over the centuries. Many people today know and feel they come from converso Jewish ancestry, and we are seeing more and more who want to convert and return to Judaism.
Thanksgiving is the kind of non-sectarian holiday whose traditions most American Jews warmly embrace. But what about those who have moved to Israel, far from the turkey farms, the stores that sell canned cranberries, and the Detroit Lions? Well, they could go to the Jerusalem bar restaurant Mike's Place, a noted hangout for American Israelis, like our Nicole Tzedek, who joined its Thanksgiving Day celebration.
By the look of this place, you might think it's any other bar in the United States. But they're actually serving up this classic Thanksgiving meal in Israel.
Thanksgiving is when the American part and the Jewish part come together, because it's all about hakarat hatov. It's all about saying thank you and understanding that we're grateful, and it's a holiday that Jews have embraced wholeheartedly. Both in America, and then when Americans come to Israel, we can't let it go.
Turkey, stuffing, green beans, even cranberry sauce, fresh from the can.
We all are American Israelis, and we just had a totally complete Thanksgiving dinner just like you had. Can you believe it? That's what they do for for Americans living in Jerusalem and Israel.
For this table of Jewish American immigrants, or Olim, it's become a yearly tradition to say thanks at Mike's Place.
Because in Israel, Thanksgiving, for those that observe, Thursday is a regular school day work day, so it's not like a day off where you can sit around and schmooze. And we decided several years ago, when we heard Mike's Place was having a full Thanksgiving dinner, let's do it. Let's all meet here. So these are all friends of ours for decades, all rabbis and spouses that we've known.
A table of American Israeli rabbis sharing a kosher meal and saying thanks. But there is one thing they say that's different for them in Israel versus the States.
There are parts of the United States that will never leave us. Thanksgiving is such a, I don't have to tell Americans, Thanksgiving is such a major part of being an American. But here, for religious Jews, we are thanking God every day, all the time.
Thankful they can all celebrate together, which the owner of Mike's Place says it's all about.
And yeah, the turkey, the stuffing, everything we do here at Mike's Place is the traditional 3-course family meal. And don't forget, Thanksgiving is about family. It's not just about the food. And the people here really bond. They come to us year after year.
Giving all of these American Israelis a big reason to be thankful. Reporting in Jerusalem, Nicole Zedek for I-24 News.
And that's our program. Thank you for joining us this week on I-24 News' Jewish World Weekly.